The moment that changed everything began with a vibration against my palm, a single buzz that sliced through the quiet of my hallway like a warning shot. My phone lit up with 3 missed calls from my lawyer, Larry. Before I could wonder why, a message flashed across the screen, stark and urgent. "Kathleen, call me now. Do not go to your sister's house. I'm serious." For a heartbeat, I stood suspended in the half-light, one arm shoved into my coat, the other hovering uselessly in the air. The world tilted, just slightly, but enough for a sharp unease to slide beneath my ribs. Rachel had been pestering me all week. "It's been ages, Isa. I'm making your favourite roast chicken, like Mum used to." Her voice used to soften me. Now it scraped at something raw, an open wound I'd pretended had long scarred over. My fingers trembled as I dialed Larry. He answered instantly. "Where are you?" His voice was low, compressed, as if strangled by urgency. "At home. Why?" "Good. Lock your doors. I'm on my way." A pause, heavy enough to bruise. "There's something you need to see. Something about Rachel. And your inheritance." A slow, cold tide crept through me. Just like that, a simple Sunday dinner curdled into the scent of betrayal, into the promise of retribution I hadn't yet articulated, but already felt burning at the base of my throat. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across my windows. Larry didn't bother to fake politeness when I opened the door. His jaw was clenched, his expression carved into that grim mask lawyers use when they're about to deliver a punishment disguised as truth. "Kathleen," he said, stepping inside, rein still clinging to his coat. "Sit." No greeting, no prelude, just that single word, "sit," like I was about to be sentenced. He set a thick brown envelope on my kitchen table. It landed with a dull thud, like a verdict. My pulse hammered. "What's going on? You're scaring me." Larry exhaled through his nose, eyes flicking toward mine for one brief, apologetic second, before he tore the bandage clean off. 3 days ago, your sister Rachel and her husband, Frank, filed a petition with the Provincial Chancery Court. His voice tightened. "They're asking the court to declare you mentally incompetent." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The room swayed, warped, as if I were viewing it through heat. Then I gave a short, cracked laugh. "Declared what? Larry, that's insane. I run a business. I handle clients, contracts, taxes." "I know," he said softly, but there was a grim heaviness behind the words. "That's not stopping them." He opened the envelope. Papers slid out. Cold, clinical weapons laid out with surgical precision. Personal justice turned against me. Betrayal dressed up as concern. "Signed affidavits," he muttered, arranging them as though preparing a crime scene. "A note from your doctor last winter? You told him you weren't sleeping well." "That was because of the flu," I whispered. "They're twisting it," he continued, "turning it into early neurological decline, cognitive confusion, impaired judgment." He pushed another sheet toward me. "A statement from your neighbour. Claims you looked disoriented one morning while taking out the trash." Disoriented. That morning when my fever had nearly knocked me sideways. The memory flared. The cold pavement, the weakness in my legs, the dizziness. A moment of human fragility now reimagined as evidence in their grim pursuit of punishment. I stared down at the documents. The words blurred, swimming like ghosts. Something inside me, something long held, long buried, began to coil and tighten. That familiar, bitterness-soaked heat. Not fear, not heartbreak, rage, pent up, boiling hatred that tasted like iron. A slow, awakening promise of revenge. "I know," Larry repeated quietly, watching my face with a caution he hadn't needed until now. He didn't understand, couldn't. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. And they'd made the first move. Declared what? The laugh that escaped me was thin and brittle, the kind that fractures before it fully forms. "Larry, that's absurd. I run a design firm. I manage deadlines, payrolls, taxes. I'm functional. I'm sane." "I know," he murmured, voice dipped in that grave restraint lawyers use when delivering truths they wish weren't real. "But they're claiming early cognitive decline, confusion, forgetfulness, erratic judgment, and they've been collecting things. He opened the envelope again, unfurling papers one by one, laying them across my table with the precision of someone preparing a case file for a grim atonement. The printed words stared back at me like accusations. Affidavits, medical notes, statements, twisted evidence crafted to wound. "Here," he said, sliding a sheet toward me. "Your doctor's note from last winter, the one where you mentioned insomnia. That was the flu. I had a fever so high I could barely stand." "They're weaponizing it," he replied gently, spinning it into neurological decline. Another page, a sworn statement from my neighbour, claiming he saw me disoriented one morning while taking out the trash. I remembered that day vividly, the dizziness, the chills, the pavement glitching under my feet, and now it was being rewritten as proof that I was unravelling. Larry watched me quietly. "They're building a pattern." He turned his laptop toward me. Lines of numbers, columns, dates, an appraisal document glowed on the screen. "Kathleen, do you know what your parents' old property is worth now? Maybe 2 million? Try 5, he said, 5.1, including the lake house." My heart gave a single bruised thud. "You inherited half when your parents died," he continued softly. "That's what this is really about." A cold, serrated awareness cut through me. "You're saying Rachel is trying to have me declared incompetent to steal the estate?" Larry didn't flinch. "Yes. If they succeed, they become your legal guardians. They'd control everything. Your accounts, your house, even your medical decisions." The chair beneath me felt suddenly unsteady, the grain of the wood blurring as though submerged underwater. Rachel and I had eaten breakfast here just last year, laughing over burnt toast. She'd held my hand and said we'd always protect each other. Now she was trying to erase me. Larry's voice softened. "People change, Kathleen, especially when money drags old wounds to the surface." Outside, snowflakes drifted like quiet omens. Inside, something colder unfurled inside my chest, a silent growing demand for retribution. Betrayal has a taste, metallic, slow-burning, impossible to forget once it hits the tongue. "You need to see the financial statement they filed," Larry said, opening another document. Rows of numbers and debts filled the screen, an ugly tapestry of desperation. "Rachel and Frank," he continued, "are drowning. They bought a 6-bedroom house in Crestwood Bluff 3 years ago. Pool, imported stone, heated driveway, mortgage, $720,000. He tapped the next line. "Frank's green tech venture lost $400,000. Their credit cards are maxed. They're behind on taxes." A slow, nauseating recognition spread through me. "So they want my assets to clean up their mess?" "They're framing it as protecting you," he said dryly. "But they're really protecting their lifestyle." My voice cracked, the betrayal scraping raw. "She's my sister. She knows I've spent my entire life being careful with money. I didn't even buy a car until I turned 40. Larry nodded. "I believe you, but she's been gathering selective moments. Every forgotten date, every misplaced key. Do you remember when she hovered over you last month while you paid bills online?" I did, her saccharine voice echoing now in my skull. "You should let me help, Isa. Tech can be confusing." I'd laughed then. Now that laughter felt like a door I'd left unlocked for a thief. "And here," Larry added, tapping another file, "they even involved your family doctor. Dr. Henry wrote a vague note saying you seemed distracted during an appointment last fall." My jaw tightened. That was during the estate chaos. I was grieving, not confused. "I know," he said, "but on paper, grief and incompetence can look dangerously similar." Silence stretched taut and suffocating. The hum of the refrigerator felt like a countdown to something irreversible. Finally, I whispered, "So, what do we do?" Larry leaned in, voice steady with a resolve that, for the first time tonight, felt like an anchor. "First," he said, "we prove you're of sound mind. I'll arrange an independent psychiatric evaluation." He paused, watching the storm gathering behind my eyes. And, Kathleen, whatever they're planning, we're going to fight it. He didn't know it yet, but I was planning something too. Something colder, deeper, born from a lifetime of suppressed hurt and the fresh sting of betrayal. A form of justice, personal justice. The kind that waits in the dark, patient and unblinking, until the perfect moment to strike. Declared, what? The laugh that left me sounded foreign. Thin, fractured, the sound a person makes when disbelief is wrestling with something colder. Larry, this is ridiculous. I run a design business. I juggle clients, deadlines, taxes. I function. I'm sane. I know, he replied quietly, and that quietness scared me more than any raised voice could have. It carried the weary gravity of someone who's watched families devour each other for far less than a $5 million estate. They're claiming early cognitive decline, he continued, confusion, forgetfulness, erratic judgment, and they've backed it with documentation. He opened the thick envelope once more and spread the papers across my table, arranging them like artifacts from a crime scene. The pages gleamed under the kitchen light, cold, clinical, damning. Signed affidavits, he said. Your doctor's note from last winter, the one about you having trouble sleeping. I had the flu, Larry, I whispered. I nearly passed out. They're twisting it into a neurological issue. Another paper slid toward me. A neighbour's sworn statement about seeing me disoriented one morning while I dragged the trash bin to the curb. I remembered that morning. Feverish, dizzy, shivering. A moment of human weakness rewritten as evidence of mental collapse. Larry watched me absorb it, his voice low. They're building a pattern designed to puncture my identity, my autonomy, my life. He turned his laptop. Do you know what your parents' old property is worth now? I hesitated. 2 million? Maybe? 5, he corrected. The appraisal came in last month. 5.1, including the lake house. A cold pulse shot through my chest. You inherited half, he said, holding my gaze, and that's what this is about. My breath caught. You're telling me Rachel wants to have me declared incompetent just to take the estate? Larry didn't flinch. Yes. The word fell between us like a blade. If they win, he continued, they'll be your legal guardians. They'll control your accounts, your home, your medical decisions, everything. I collapsed into the chair, the wood grain swimming in my vision. My hands trembled against the table, the same table Rachel and I sanded and stained ourselves during a summer that now felt like a memory belonging to another life. We'd eaten pancakes here, shared secrets, laughed until our stomachs hurt. She used to say we'd always protect each other, I whispered, that we had no one else. Sometimes people change, Kathleen, Larry murmured, his tone gentler now, especially when money stirs old resentments. Snowflakes drifted beyond the window, soft, silent, indifferent. Inside me, something else fell. Not snow, not sadness, something harder, colder, the first crystallizing layer of revenge, settling with terrifying clarity. Larry adjusted his glasses and opened another folder on his laptop. You need to see this. It's the financial statement they filed with the petition. Rows of numbers lit the screen like a confession. Rachel and Frank, he said, are drowning. They bought a new house in Greybridge Hollow. 6 bedrooms. A pool. Marble imported from Valencia. Mortgage, $720,000. He clicked another line. Frank's Terrawell startup burned through $400,000 in losses. Their credit cards are maxed. They're behind on taxes. My throat tightened. So they want my assets to patch up their disasters. They're arguing you've been vulnerable since your parents died, he said. That grief compromised your judgment. They're packaging it as protection. But what they're really protecting is their lifestyle. She's my sister, I whispered, the words scraping raw from my throat. She knows I don't waste money. I've always been careful. I rented until I was 40. Larry nodded slowly. I believe you, but she's been collecting moments, selective snapshots. Every time you mixed up a meeting date, Every time you misplaced your keys, she probably kept mental tallies, maybe even written ones. A memory flashed, Rachel leaning over my shoulder last month as I paid bills online. Let me help, Isa. These things get confusing. Her tone had been syrupy, almost maternal. I had laughed. God, how naive that laugh feels now. They even brought in your family doctor, Larry said, tapping another file. Dr. Kyle. He wrote a vague note about you seeming distracted during an appointment last fall. That was when Mum's estate documents were still unresolved, I said sharply. I wasn't confused. I was grieving. I know, he said, but grief on paper can look like incompetence when someone wants it to. A long silence descended. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled it. The house felt too still, as though holding its breath. Finally, I asked, quiet, steady, a blade sheathed in calm steel. What do we do? Larry leaned forward. First, we prove you're of sound mind. I'll arrange an independent psychiatric evaluation, conducted by Dr. Virginia. She's thorough and impossible to manipulate. He hesitated, watching my expression. Kathleen, we're going to fight this. He didn't realize that something inside me had already shifted. This wasn't just about defense anymore. It was about retribution. Slow, precise, inevitable, personal justice rising in me like a storm long promised. Some betrayals demand consequence. Some wounds demand repayment. And Rachel had no idea what she had awakened. The report concludes that Miss Carter exhibits no signs whatsoever of cognitive impairment, Larry said, his voice carrying across the courtroom with quiet precision. In fact, she tested significantly above average for her age group. Sophia's brow lifted. Is that so? Larry handed the folder to the clerk with a measured gesture. Confident, controlled, lethal. And furthermore, he continued, I submit evidence that Mrs. Rowan and her husband are under severe financial distress, over $700,000 in mortgage debt, $400,000 lost in a failed business, and extensive unpaid taxes. A murmur rippled through the gallery, the kind that signals blood in the water. Rachel's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honour, this is irrelevant. It's entirely relevant, Larry snapped, steel slicing through his tone, because it establishes motive. He let the silence spread, dark and heavy, then nodded at me. My hand shook, but I reached into my folder and pulled out the small black USB drive, the object that had kept me awake for nights, a symbol of betrayal sharpened into justice. Your Honour, Larry said, this recording was provided by Mrs. Rowan's own daughter, 15-year-old Heather. It captures Rachel and her husband discussing their plan to have Miss Carter declared incompetent and to liquidate her assets for personal gain. The room gasped. Rachel went white, not pale, but corpse white. Frank's jaw twitched, the first crack in his smug composure. Play it, Sophia ordered. The audio crackled to life. Rachel's voice flowed through the speakers, smooth, casual, soaked in venom. Once the court rules Kathleen incompetent, we sell her condo, transfer the accounts. She won't even understand what's happening. Frank chimed in smug. That'll wipe out the debts and buy us time. Then, Rachel again, low and cold. She's had enough. It's our turn. The judge's face hardened with each line, jaw tightening like a trap. When the recording ended, silence crashed over the room. You could hear the electricity in the lights. You could hear people breathe. Larry stepped forward, voice steady and deadly. Your Honour, this isn't guardianship. This is premeditated exploitation, calculated abuse cloaked in concern. Rachel's lawyer scrambled. Your Honour, the recording wasn't obtained with... Sophia raised a hand. This is not a criminal trial, and I find it highly relevant to intent. She turned to Rachel, her gaze sharp enough to carve bone. Mrs. Rowan, would you like to explain why you are discussing selling your sister's property while she sits here before me, perfectly lucid? Rachel's lips parted. That was taken out of context. The judge leaned forward, voice like winter ice. What possible context justifies planning to take your sister's home? Rachel's silence was louder than any confession. Tears welled in my eyes, but not out of sorrow. This was release. A violent exhale after being suffocated by betrayal. Truth, finally, had oxygen, and the courtroom felt different because of it. Sophia adjusted her glasses. This petition is not only dismissed, it is dismissed with prejudice. Rachel flinched. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mrs. Rowan and Mr. Rowan are prohibited from contacting Miss Carter or approaching her residence within 100 metres for the next 2 years. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Frank stared at the floor as if it might open and swallow him. And this matter, the judge added, is being referred to the Crown Prosecution Service for potential charges of fraud and elder abuse. Legal costs incurred by Miss Carter shall be paid by the petitioners. The gavel came down with a crack that vibrated straight through my bones. It was over. Or at least, that's what Larry thought. He touched my shoulder gently. It's over, Kathleen. But as my gaze followed Rachel, my sister, my childhood confidant, the girl who once braided my hair, a realization bloomed, painful and certain. It wasn't over, not by a long stretch, because betrayal like this doesn't evaporate with a verdict. It lodges itself under the skin. It festers. It demands recognition, and sometimes retribution. When the courtroom emptied, everyone escaped quickly, desperate to flee the heavy air that still clung to the walls. But I stayed in my seat, letting the silence settle. Victory tasted strange, hollow, sharp around the edges. Larry packed his files beside me. You did incredibly well, he said softly. You stayed calm. You told the truth, and the judge saw it. Did she? I whispered, staring at the doorway where Rachel had vanished, because I still can't believe what the truth actually is. Outside, the cold wind knifed into my lungs, clean, merciless, honest. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply, not freely, not peacefully, but with the unmistakable knowledge that healing begins only after the fire has burned everything false to ash. Outside the courtroom, reporters hovered like vultures, waiting for a carcass to cool, their murmurs rising and falling in waves. Court officers threaded past us with practiced urgency, but the world around me felt strangely muted, distant, slowed. Then I heard her. Aunt Izzy? Heather stood a few steps away, cheeks blotched, lashes wet. Before she could crumble further, I pulled her into my arms. She pressed her face into my shoulder, shaking. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I didn't know it would... Heather, I whispered, lifting her chin gently. Don't apologize, not for telling the truth. You were brave in a way your parents weren't. Larry stepped closer, clearing his throat. The judge's referral for prosecution is official now. Fraud, attempted exploitation. There will likely be charges. I'll oversee the filings. I nodded, though my thoughts felt suspended. And Rachel, I murmured. She'll face consequences, he said softly. But the hardest part won't come from the courts. It'll come from confronting who she's become. That evening, my house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. The masks had all fallen. I brewed tea and sat at the old kitchen table, staring at a faint, ring-shaped stain Rachel had left months ago. A ghost of a moment before everything fractured. For once, I didn't push my emotions away. I let them rise. Betrayal's sting, the fatigue in my bones, the strange ache of letting go. My phone buzzed. Can I stay with you tonight? Dad's furious. I don't feel safe here. Heather. My answer came before my brain caught up. Pack a bag. You belong here. An hour later, she stood in my doorway with a duffel bag and red-rimmed eyes. We didn't speak much. I warmed milk and cocoa, handed her a blanket. She curled up on the couch and fell asleep almost instantly. And when I finally lay down, sleep found me without a fight, because even though a sister had slipped away, something steadier had taken her place. Family chosen, not inherited. Weeks drifted by. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a battleground and began to breathe again. Heather's laughter returned first, bright, unguarded, echoing off the walls as she rushed through her school mornings. Evenings brought small rituals, chopping vegetables side by side, watching old comedies, planting rosemary and mint in the backyard. Where there had once been anxious stillness, there was now a gentle hum of life. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, Heather paused over her homework. "Aunt Izzy, do you think you'll ever forgive her?" The question settled into my chest like a stone dropped in deep water. I set my mug down and watched a lone leaf drift across the backyard. "Forgiveness," I said, choosing the words carefully, "doesn't erase what happened. It just means choosing not to let it dictate the rest of your life." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. I miss the mum she used to be. "Me too," I admitted. "Your mother and I were inseparable once. She was my best friend long before she became my adversary. But grief and greed can mutate people. They stop seeing the people they love. They only see what those people can give them." Heather nodded slowly. No words needed. That weekend, Larry arrived carrying a folder and the faint hint of relief on his face. "I've got the final documents," he said. "Your assets are fully protected. The guardianship file is closed. But, Kathleen, I strongly advise setting up a long-term trust, something that safeguards everything you own. Maybe for Heather's future." A small smile tugged at my lips. "Already decided." His brow arched. "Oh?" "I want a trust in Heather's name," I said. "Her education, her future, her independence. She's the only one who chose truth over convenience." Heather's breath caught. "Aunt Izzy, really, you don't have to do that." "I want to," I said firmly, taking her hand. "You stood by me when everyone else tried to rewrite reality. That kind of integrity deserves to be honoured." Larry exhaled, a rare, unguarded smile appearing. "Then, let's make it official." After he left, Heather and I sat surrounded by textbooks and half-eaten cookies. Outside, the world still carried the chill of what had happened, but inside, warmth was returning. Slower than I wished, but steady. Trust rebuilds quietly, brick by brick. 6 months later, winter finally surrendered to spring. The sharp edges of the past softened, though they never fully vanished. Heather and I drove out to the lake house, the same place my parents had loved, the same place Rachel once tried to take from me. This time, it didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a beginning. The road curled between rows of budding trees, sunlight dripping through the branches in broken shards, more like a truce than forgiveness. As we drove, the world outside the windshield shifted from grey city edges to the softer, open quiet of the countryside. By the time the lake came into view, my chest had loosened in ways I hadn't noticed it was tight. I pulled up near the old dock. The boards were weathered, but still standing, like everything that had survived the storm. The water moved in slow, deliberate ripples, catching the sky and breaking it into pieces. Heather came to stand beside me, her hair tugged by the wind. "Do you ever miss her?" she asked. I let the question hang there for a breath. "Sometimes," I said at last. "But I think I miss who I thought she was more than who she actually became." Heather's gaze dropped to the surface of the lake. "I used to think family meant loving someone no matter what," she murmured. "I used to think that too." I gave her a small, sad smile. "Now, I think it means loving them without letting them destroy you. You don't owe anyone the right to keep reopening your wounds." For a while we said nothing. We just listened, to the wind threading through the trees, to the hush of water against the shore, to a world that hadn't stopped turning even when betrayal had tried to freeze ours in place. The rage, the hunger for revenge, the desire for punishment, they were still there, but quieter now, smouldering embers instead of boiling hatred. "Grandpa used to say this lake was where he felt closest to Grandma," I said softly. "I never really understood that before." "And now?" Heather asked. "Now I think I do. Peace doesn't come from who stays. It comes from who stops trying to carve pieces out of you. From who chooses truth over convenience," I added silently, feeling her shoulder brush mine. Heather leaned gently against me. "Do you think Mum will ever change?" I watched the horizon, the sun beginning its slow descent, staining the water in muted gold. "Maybe," I said. "But that's her path, not ours. Her reckoning, her grim atonement. We don't have to wait for it." When we got home that evening, I stepped through the doorway and paused. The walls were the same, the floors were the same, but the feeling was not. These rooms had once witnessed fear, the suffocating press of unresolved grievances and quiet panic. Now they held laughter, clinking cups, late-night whispers, and a fragile but growing sense of safety. This was the same house my sister had tried to strip from me, along with my name, my autonomy, my future. She'd wanted my assets, my mind declared broken, my life signed over like a balance sheet. In the end, all her scheming had done was expose what could never be taken. Not my sanity, not my worth, not the love I chose to protect. At the dining table, Heather bent over her books, hair falling across her face, a mug of tea cooling beside her. I poured myself a cup and sat down opposite her, a faint smile tugging at my lips. It struck me then. Family was not about bloodlines or shared last names scribbled on old documents. It was about who stayed when the world tilted against you, who stood beside you when others sharpened their knives. Personal justice hadn't just been served in a courtroom. It had been served in the quiet choice of who I allowed to remain in my life. Sometimes the truest family isn't the one you're born into. It's the one that refuses to leave when everything else falls apart.